Alrighty. Without further ado, let's begin with our presentation. Let me make sure I don't have my captions on. All right. This should be good, and it is. Okay. So today we will be discussing the insurmountable agnosticism of the naturalist. And I'll explain what all of those terms mean and why I come to that conclusion as we go on. But this is in response to Michael Roos, the way that he describes naturalism and the very concept of it, and the death of reason as the result of naturalism. So we will go on to this real soon. Oops, trying to move ahead there. There we go. And so, couple of terms real quick. We have agnosticism, atheism, naturalism, epistemology. The most important terms here are really agnosticism and naturalism. So agnosticism, according to William Rowe, in the popular sense, it refers to someone who neither believes nor disbelieves in God, whereas an atheist is someone who disbelieves in God. They believe that he does not exist. And so in the strict sense, though, William Rowe would even go on to say that agnosticism speaks about this lack of human capability, the inability of human reason to be able to state and give sufficient proof and reason as to the existence of God or the non-existence of God in either case. In my instance, though, agnosticism means one not knowing, simply just not knowing. So a general agnosticism would be not knowing anything about reality, not knowing anything about the truth of reality, any given instance. And so my agnosticism is not so much specific to religious concepts, but really focused on concepts that are general, having agnosticism about anything and everything, any claim or any reality which could be true, being agnostic about it, not knowing if it's true or false. And in the case of naturalism, according to Michael Roos, because I'll be critiquing his view, because his view is a very accurate view of naturalism, naturalism is understanding the world in terms of unbroken law. That's a methodological naturalism. And that there is nothing beyond this natural world. So that's that metaphysical naturalism. And so we'll go through each of these in a certain sense by the end, but I'll focus mostly on methodological naturalism, because it's the grounding for a lot of this. And epistemology, the study of knowledge, or the study of the nature of knowledge. And so we will begin. So according to his article, The Naturalist Challenge to Religion, Michael Roos attempts to present all of these different claims, stating that purely naturalistic, that is non-supernatural, explanations can be given by observation, and testing, and reasoning, for the origin of life, free will, consciousness, morality, all of this. What he's trying to get at is this. He states we do not need a supernatural, untestable, unobservable source for these different systems, especially given that naturalism gives a better epistemic reason. That is, it gives a sufficient and proper explanation for each of these, without having to appeal to the supernatural. Now, he doesn't necessarily explain why it's wrong or unintelligent to appeal to the supernatural. He just assumes that it's the case. But honestly, none of these points are very important. Number one, because he's just incorrect on each one. But number two, because as I go through his paper and as I get to the parts where he talks about truth and knowing reality and the fact that evolution can lead to deceptions, none of this matters because his system is self-undermining. But we'll get to that. So first, we will look at what Michael Roos himself describes as his grounding for epistemology, for coming to acquire knowledge. And he states, in his own words, that methodological naturalism, the how we come to know without supernatural means, this embodies the proper procedure for acquiring knowledge. This is the proper means for epistemology, for knowing and for coming to know. And this is done by use of reason and observation. Now, to be clear, I would hold, and I think all of us would hold, that reason and observation, especially if you're in the Thomistic camp, existential Thomists, right? We would wager that reason and observation are good grounds for learning about reality and learning about God by reasoning from effects to cause. And then even some via negativa, taking what we observe and getting rid of the limitations. In either case, this is not the issue. The issue is not that reason and observation are used for acquiring knowledge, but that according to his own system, as I'll read on, all of our knowledge comes through our human faculties. If they distort reality, so be it. So what he is saying is, because according to Michael Roos, objective morality does not exist, and our belief that morals are objective is an illusion. It's an illusion that has been created and developed by evolution, such that we would have these morals which seem to help us live as more social creatures, and allows us to survive. So natural selection, that's what NS stands for there. Natural selection deals with survival, not truth. It deals with how a type of pragmatism, how well it works out, but it doesn't deal with reality and properly representing reality as it actually is, according to naturalism. So I'm not strawmanning here. So he even states, really, philosophically, there is no escape. One of my favorite sentences, because he's the most honest about his position there, before he tries to dance around it by this nonsensical claim about nature as helping him escape from reason. In either case, he tries to play it down, but his system, as we can very clearly see, is self-defeating. And the general idea is that if objective morality is an illusion, because evolution allowed this illusion to develop to help us survive better, then we might as well say that applies to all of our perceptions, all of our beliefs, all of our conclusions, because who's to say what is true reality and an illusion or an alteration or anything else? And so the very fundamental grounding of naturalism, which, remember what I said a couple slides ago, observation and experimentation, or a type of reasoning from experimentation, these two things are now not able to be trusted. You can't trust your observations, because if you can't trust your observations or beliefs about objective morals, then you most definitely cannot trust your thoughts or beliefs about any kind of reasoned conclusion, if that's moral, or observation, if you follow some sort of natural moral realism, and that's strange. In either case, it's undermined by its own system. It is self-defeating because it removes the possibility of knowing if it is actually true, or a true description of reality. So this is not the naturalist. This is a character I created to try and explain just how much deception is really happening with naturalism and any type of materialism, really, atheistic materialism. And so we have Nat with all of these different parts to his body that have been sewn on, and that's what those red stitches mean. They've been sewn on and they cannot be removed by Nat at all. And so Nat has attached to his head this bar that has these two frames, these two filters for light, such that everything that he sees will be through these two filters. And he can't see anything as it really is, but through these two filters. So number one is this gray filter that is able to capture and alter the shape of things as light of the shape of things comes through. So while the real instance that he's looking at is this type of nice, beautiful apple tree, this gray panel, for some reason, evolution said, hey, you know what? Humans are very afraid of tall vegetation. And so if humans, those humans who have a perception of taller vegetation as if it's shorter, their perceptions allow them to be less afraid, and they can actually get the apples. So evolution will select for those who perceive tall vegetation as if it's small. And so that's where we get frame one, right? Now it takes this big apple tree, it thinks it's like an apple shrub. Frame two is just an evolutionary accident where we have this blue filter for all light coming through. And so the apple bush starts to look less red and more purple. It might even look like a blueberry or a blueberry bush. But that's the image from the apple tree to the blueberry bush that comes into Nat's eyes, into his vision, and then eventually to his brain. And just to cover all the other senses, because sadly observation by eyes is the only one that Michael Roos talks about, we'd also have to extend this all the way to part three, which would be some type of headphone that modifies and alters every frequency of sound that comes in and modifies it, alters it, such that you're not hearing the original alteration or the original frequency of sound, the original volume, heck, perhaps not even the original order of the words that were spoken, but what you're hearing is some sort of modified, jumbled frequency of sounds. Because perhaps this was evolutionarily favorable, right, for humans to be born with these weird headphone things that impede sound so that people are less afraid of reality. And so this goes with number 4, these mittens that are sewn to his hands, right? He's born with these just attached to him. And so he can't really feel things in a distinct and realistic sense. Really, he's feeling everything through these mittens. And so it's all just one jumbled sensation. With 5, he has a sieve. He was born with a sieve, attached to him over his mouth. So only certain chemicals and only certain tastes can actually be filtered and sensed through it. And number 6, a little clothespin on his nose. So only certain types of smells can actually get through. And as they get through, perhaps this clothespin alters the amount in total and way that they get through. So all of these sensations are jumbled. And most importantly, number 7, the brain, that I have kind of faded in the background there. This is the place where all of these different sensations, and they're all already messed up and altered, by the way, all these different sensations come together. And then based on the way that your brain is structured genetically, they perhaps are altered even further. Perhaps the way that all these sensations work together start to actually make mistakes and start to form strange perceptions of the tree, even more distinct from how it actually is in reality. So this entire thing, and I try to evidence that with this whole calculator, right, where it incorrectly, because of poor programming, it incorrectly solves the problem that is presented there. That could be the case for humans. We could just have poor programming and not actually have the sufficient and necessary material in our brains to correctly analyze reality and come out with the correct outputs from the real inputs. So that's the issue we're really looking at with naturalism. And so naturalism, again, has this other aspect to it, not only the deceptive nature of evolution, but also along with this deception is this materialistic determinism, which is to say that no matter what one might see, the conclusion given the stimulus is determined. And it's determined by 2 main qualities. It's determined by individual's genetics, which I have on the left there, the genetics, in addition to how the genetics interact with the environment of this individual. So let's say Michael Roos, given his genetics and the environments in which he was raised in, these both had effects on him that he had no control over. And so his brain also is something that's been formed without his control, without his will, such that he has a type of brain that will react to certain stimuli a certain determined way. In the same way that we had a calculator, you put 1 + 1, and maybe the calculator is poorly programmed. So whenever you put 1 + 1, this calculator will put out 3. This other calculator will put out 4. Maybe some occasionally put out 2, but who's to say which one's right? Because it's all natural to the calculator. So in his case, he can't really know what positions are the most reasonable or which positions correctly describe reality, as he admits through the deception of evolution. Rather, every single conclusion, belief, thought, idea, notion, all of these derived from the brain are materially determined by the genetics interacting with the environment to produce a brain that will interact with some stimulus and produce this outcome. There is no free will. There is no reasoning. It's just stimulus, brain that is determined to take that stimulus and read it a certain way and produce an outcome. So it's not that any naturalist truly believes that naturalism is correct or true, but more that naturalism is the necessary conclusion they must come to because their brain determined it, because they don't have any free will or some sort of soul, to step out of their own brain and disagree with it. No, they have total agnosticism about true reality. They have no way to know what's truly real and what's not, what's a deception, because they're materially determined to come to the conclusions that they do. So this starts to become really important in the ways that methodological naturalism and epistemology are at odds. There's this very clear sense in which they're at odds. If you look at the way that there's this differentiation of truths, differentiating between objective truths and subjective truths, that requires a way to trust your observations and reasoning. As we already described, in naturalism, that doesn't exist. These observations and reasonings are not trustworthy. So naturalism denies this ability to differentiate between objective truths and subjective truths in human brains. That's dangerous. If humans lack that faculty, if humans lack that ability to differentiate between objective truth and subjective truth, then that means that naturalists also would say that they have no way to know if naturalism is objectively true or just a matter of personal opinion that they were determined to believe. Going on to differentiation of reason. The way to differentiate between a reasonable conclusion and an unreasonable conclusion requires knowing relevant facts and sound conclusions. And by that, we mean facts that are actually relevant to the consideration, to the matter we're reasoning through, thinking through, and sound conclusions, conclusions that follow from facts that we can all agree upon somewhat. But naturalism, again, neither of these is knowable. You cannot know which facts are truly relevant or objectively true or intellectually relevant, and you can't know which conclusions are sound. You can't know which ones are relevant because evolution is deceptive, and you can't know which conclusions are sound and logical because you're determined to have those conclusions because of your material. So you can't know what's sound or relevant. Therefore, naturalism denies this ability to know what is really reasonable and what's not reasonable. That has a lot of effects. If we take these effects for the naturalist and look at how that affects science, the naturalist, when they see science, they really should see all these conclusions and findings, as we might say it, as meaningless or false or deceptions, because we used our observations and our reasoning to come to these conclusions, and we can't trust that they're actually functional or they really describe reality. In science, we can't even know if evolution is true. For the naturalist, they can't actually know if naturalism or evolution are the best explanations. For morality, same thing. No way to know what is objective morality versus subjective morality because they're all just outcomes from your brain that were determined to be thought of and concluded. And so there's no way to differentiate between objective morality versus subjective morality. For religious dialogue, a naturalist should state that theistic conclusions are not unlikely or unreasonable. Naturalists often do state that Christian theism is unreasonable, unlikely, and foolish. But really, those notions of foolishness and unreasonableness only apply if you have a system where reason is actually knowable and probability is actually knowable instead of just being a thing that your brain forced you to calculate and to come to the conclusion about. For naturalism itself, it backfires in that naturalistic beliefs are just as likely to be illusory as anything else. Morals and the objectivity of morality, perceptions, notions of objective truth, mathematical calculations, probabilistic determinations, all of it is just as likely to be deceptive. And so you cannot call theism unlikely, so it becomes more likely, and you can't call naturalism more likely, it becomes less likely. It's all just agnosticism. Just, I don't know. Who knows? No one can say. But for the Christian theist, this is the excellent part. We have a prima facie, I hope I said that right, good epistemic reason to reject naturalism and atheism. That means at face value, at the instance, at the introduction, we have a good reason to reject naturalism because naturalism rejects naturalism. And so if naturalism rejects its own grounding and its own strength, then it's not a good system to hold because it also rejects the systems it uses to prove itself. Like science, the very notion that it uses science to prove the origin of life shows that it's not a good system because it would hold that science is likely a deceitful development by humans, a deceitful methodological analysis and observation of reality by humans. So can't answer origin of life questions, definitely can't answer free will questions because it fundamentally denies that, or objective morality, forget about it. Now, for number two, we have a prima facie good epistemic reason to reject any conclusion or philosophical development from naturalists. Until they reject materialism or other deterministic models, what I'm saying is that I'm not trying to be dismissive to naturalists or atheistic philosophy, but what I'm saying is if a system fundamentally ignores epistemology, and will not give an explanation for how we can come to differentiate between objective truth and subjective truth, things are really reasonable or unreasonable. If a system denies those realities and denies the ability to differentiate between them, that system makes it such that any other conclusions they come to are equally meaningless in their system. So it's good to press naturalists to say, hey, you know what, I think your philosophical questions are interesting, but in your own system, they're pointless until you reject materialism, naturalism, or these other deterministic models. Make it such that your system can deal with real reasoning, real logic, real descriptions of real reality. And when that happens, then we can have a reasonable discussion about their other beliefs of philosophy. But finally, for us, we have a prima facie a good epistemic reason to embrace Christian theism, because Christianity allows for an explanation of all of these different realities while allowing for true reason as a faculty of the human soul, true free will, and a true description of objective morality, consciousness, and the origin of life. And with that being said, Christians, please feel empowered to have a good reason to reject atheism and naturalism until they make the change to embrace reason, truth, and knowledge. Thank you.